Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out Edgar Allan Poe. This is called The Oval Portrait. The chateau into which my valet had ventured to make forcible entrance, rather than permit me in my desperate wounded condition to pass the night in the open air, was one of those piles of commingled gloom and grandeur which so long frowned upon the Apennines, not less in fact than in the fancy of Mrs. Radcliffe. The all appearance had been temporarily and very lately abandoned. We established ourselves in one of the smallest and least sumptuous furnished apartments. It lay in a remote turret in the building. Its decoration was rich, yet tattered and antique. Its walls were hung with tapestry and bedecked with manifold and multiform armorial trophies, together with an unusually great number of very spirited modern paintings in frame of rich golden arabesque. In these paintings, which depended from the walls not only in their main surfaces, but in the main nooks which the bizarre architecture of the show rendered necessary, in these paintings, my incipient delirium perhaps had caused me to take deep interest, so that I bade Pedro to close the heavy shutters of the room, since it was already night, to light the tongues of the tall candelabrum which stood by the head of my bed, to throw open far and wide the fringed curtains of black velvet, which enveloped the bed itself. I wished all this done, and that I might resign myself, if not to sleep, at least to alternately to the contemplation of these pictures and the perusal of the small volume which had been found upon the pillow, and which purported to criticize the describe them. Long I read, and devoutly I gazed. Rapidly and gloriously the hours flew by, and the deep midnight came. The position of the candelabrum displeased me, and outreaching my hand with difficulty, rather than disturb my slumbering valet, I placed it so as to throw its rays more fully upon the book. But the action produced an effect altogether unanticipated. The rays of the numerous candles, for there were many, now fell within a niche of the room which had hitherto been thrown into deep shade by one of the bedposts. I thus saw in vivid light a picture of all unnoticed before. It was a portrait of a young woman just ripening into womanhood. I fancied at the painting hurriedly, and then closed my eyes. Why did this was not my first apparent even to my own perception, but while my lids remained thus shut, I ran over in mind my reason for so shutting them. It was an impulse movement to gain time for thought, and to make sure that my vision had not deceived me, to calm and subdue my fancy for more sober and more certain gaze. In a very few moments I again looked fixedly at the painting. I now saw aright. I could not and would not doubt, for the first flashing of the candles upon that canvas had seemed to dissipate the dreamy stupor which was stealing over my senses, and to startle me at once into waking life. The portrait, I have already said, was that of a young girl. It was a mere head and shoulders, done in what was technically termed a vignette manner, much of the style of the favorite heads of Sully. The arms, the bosom, and even the radiant hair melted imperceptibly into the vague yet deep shadow which formed the background of the whole. The frame was oval, which gilded and filigreed in Moresque, and a thing of art. Nothing could be more admirable than the painting itself, but it could have been neither the execution of the work nor the immoral beauty of the countenance which had so suddenly and so vehemently moved me. Last of all, it could have been that my fancy, shaken from its half slumber, had mistaken the head of the living person. I saw at once that the peculiarities of the design, of the vignetting, and of the frame must have been instantly dispelled. Such ideas must have prevented them even its momentary entertainment. Thinking earnestly upon these points, I remained for an hour perhaps, half sitting, half reclining, with my vision riveted upon the portrait. At length, satisfied with the true secret of its effect, I fell back within the bed. I had found the spell of the picture in an absolute lifelikeliness of expression, which at first startling, finally confounded, subdued, and appalled me. The deep and reverent awe, I replaced the candelabrum in the former position. The cause of my deep agitation began thus shut from view. I sought eagerly the volume which discussed the paintings and their histories. Turning to the number which designed the oval portrait, I there read the vague and quaint words which follows: Such was a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more than lovely than full of glee. And evil was the hour when she saw and loved and wedded the painter. He, passionate, studious, austere, and having already a bride in his art, she, a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee, all light and smiles and frolicsome of a young fawn, loving and cherishing all things, hating only the art, which was her rival, dreading only the palette and brushes of the other untoward instruments which deprived her of her countenance of her lover. And this is a terrible thing for this lady to hear the painter speaking of his desire to portray even his young bride, but she was humble and obedient and sat meekly for many weeks in the dark, high turret chamber where the light dripped upon the pale canvas from only overhead. But he, the painter, took glory in his work, which went on from hour to hour and from day to day. And he was as passionate, wild, and moody man who became lost in reveries, so that he would not see the light which fell so ghastly into the lone turret, whether the health and the spirits of his bride, who pined visibly to all but him. Yet he smiled on still and on uncomplainingly, because he saw the painter, who had high renown, took a favorite and burning pleasure in his task, the rout day and night to depict her, who he so loved, yet who grew daily more dispirited and weak. And in sooth, some of his beheld the portrait, spoke of its resemblance in low words as of a mighty marvel, and proved not less of the power of the painter than his deep love for her, whom he depicted so surpassingly well. But at length, as the labor drew nearer to its conclusion, there was admitted none into the turret, for the painter had grown wild with the ardor of his work, and turned his eyes on the canvas rarely, even to regard the countenance of his wife. He would not see that the tints which he spread upon the canvas were drawn from her cheeks, which sat beside him. And when many weeks had passed, and had little remained to do, save one brush upon the mouth and one tint upon the eye, the spirit of the lady again flickered upon as the flame within the socket of the lamp. And when the brush was given, and then the tint was placed, and for one moment the painter stood entranced before the work which he had wrought, but in the next, while he yet gazed, he grew tremulous and very pallid and aghast, and crying with a loud voice, "This is indeed life indeed," itself turned suddenly to regard his beloved. She was dead. That's the end of the oval portrait. I'd like to read one more poem by Emily Bronte. This is called Stanzas 2. Stanzas to who? I don't know. It's just blank. Stanzas 2. Well, some may hate and some may scorn, and some may quite forget thy name, but my sad heart must never mourn, and ruined hopes thy blessed flame. 'Twas thus I thought an hour ago, but weeping o'er that wretched's woe, and one turned back my gushing tears, and lit my altered eyes with sneers. Then bless the friendly dust, I said, that hides the unlamented head. Vain as thou wert, and weak as vain, the slave of falsehood, pride, and pain, my heart less wrought akin to thine, my soul is powerless over mine. But these were thoughts that vanished too, unwise, unholy, and untrue. Do I despise the timid deer because his limbs are fleet with fear? Or would I mock the wolf's death howl because his form is gaunt and foul? Or hear the joy of leveret's cry because he cannot bravely die? No, and above his memory let's pity's heart as tender be. Say, earth, lie lightly on that breast, and kind heaven, grant thy spirit rest. That is our lesson for today between Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Bronte. If you think there's any truth and like what I'm doing here, please have a nice day.